Hey guys, welcome back to the Free Life Agents podcast. Today I have a very special guest who is going to be offering a lot of insights into not just the real estate space as an agent, but also as an investor and actually a full-time property manager as well. So he can offer definitely a lot of interesting insights when it comes to real estate. He is an active real estate investor up in the Bryan College Station area, mostly focusing on fourplexes and duplexes. But yeah, without further ado, I want to introduce my guest today, Greg Schwartz. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kobe.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, you've been on a couple of different podcasts, the most popular one being believe it or not, the Biggerpockets Rookies Real Estate podcast. So I'm super grateful to have an actual celebrity guest on my on my show today. But yeah, no, Greg, for those who are listening who, might not have listened to your podcast on Biggerpockets, could you just tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got into real estate and what you're kind of focusing on at the moment right now?
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate big accolade calling me a celebrity. I don't know if I would use those words, but I did sneak on the rookie podcast mostly because my wife, she's the real celebrity. But yeah, so background, spent 9 years in the Marine Corps active duty. Towards the end of my time there, I was an instructor in UH-1 Huey, which is an assault aircraft. So basically doing troop transport, doing night vision goggle, rocket shoots, and fast ropes, and all the fun stuff. And we got to the point in my career where the flying would happen less often, and there'd be more paperwork involved. And that was kind of the time to call it quits and transition. And so the normal transition from being a pilot in the military is usually to be a commercial pilot. And I took a hard left and came to real estate. So yeah, transitioned out of that. I had a deployment right before I got out, and that's where the education, took off. And I had 6 months of being on a ship, and that's a lot of downtime, which means a lot of reading. And so there's a ton of education. That was great for my transition from that to having no income, basically relocating from North Carolina to Texas, starting a whole new career. But I had the background, at least through the books I've read, the podcasts I listened to, kind of like this. I was absorbing everything I could to prepare for that transition. And so now, yeah, I'm a 9 to 5 property manager. I'm a full-time investor, and I'm a part-time real estate agent for Keller Williams. And so that's where we sit now, is just kind of jumped in full bore, and here we are.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I mean, kind of touching back on that, I mean, did you always know that you were going to be doing real estate? I know you said you kind of took a hard left there, but like, did you always know in your heart that you were going to, dive into real estate, whether it's investing or as a realtor, or was that just something that kind of came on your plate?
Um, so that's like, if you listen to the Biggerpockets, like the money podcast, like what's your money story? Um, my dad always made sure that I was very conscious of finances, right? That was one of the things he instilled in me. So when it came to that point in my life where I was, 24, buying my first house, I didn't know Biggerpockets. I didn't know investing, but I knew that that was an important purchase and something that could easily hurt me and help me. And so when I made that purchase, it was mostly location. That's all I knew about real estate. Location was important. And while owning that home, the thought process was like, well, eventually I have to buy another one. And I had a few buddies that had some rentals just in the military. When you move around enough, you kind of, if you don't sell, you end up with a few houses here and there. And so talking to them and talking to guys about those kind of opportunities, and then just trying to know about investing in general. That's when I ran into Biggerpockets. So it was about, so that was probably 2016, somewhere around there, that I first was introduced to the idea of being a purposeful investor. And then it was 2.5 years of studying and listening to podcasts, learning, and starting to make offers. So yeah, it didn't start off as real estate, but it kind of grew on me, as I was just being money conscious.
Yeah, I think that's really important, is that, kind of being money conscious. Most people just gravitate towards real estate
Yeah.
automatically because, that's where most of the wealth is actually built. So
Right.
one way or another, people are just going to gravitate towards that. And for you, kind of getting started, what was kind of like that process like? Just getting started in real estate, aside from the education and the listening to
Yeah.
podcasts.
A lot of mistakes. So you got to take action, and that's the I'll start with there. Like that's the moral of the story is you got to take action. The reality is you're gonna make a lot of mistakes when you just take action, and that's all right. So I read the Long Distance Investing book by David Green, and I picked a town I'd never been to and a state that I'd only been to a few times. And bought an investment property, which I'd never done, with a agent who was the first one I called, to be managed by a property management company who was the first one I called, in a street that when the property manager showed me the property, he made sure that he had his concealed carry on him, right? So let's talk about like mistakes that can be made. It was a $71,000 duplex. It was rough. It was bad, but it was my dad and I in on it. We were partners. I think our total capital in was like $30,000. I was making pretty decent money and I had that saved up. So it wasn't, if I lost that 15 grand, my portion of that, I wouldn't have been out, on the streets. And so in that sense, it was conservative. The town itself, I did a lot of market research. Huntsville, Alabama, since has gone through the roof. But it was a very sound market to invest in. And it beat the 1% rule. I think we were looking at, I don't know, rents were like maybe 1,500 per side on this duplex. And we got it for 72. So I was beating the 1% rule. And then I didn't file taxes on the LLC we created. So that was like a big whoops. I didn't stay on top of my property management. So it sat vacant for like 3 months when all they had to do was like an easy turn, just all kinds of stuff. And so that was like the first thing I did. And it was a big learning curve. But I knew that, right? So like when I had these things that screwed up, and I did it, closed all this leading up to my deployment. So for about half the time of owning this property, I was either doing workups for a deployment, where we actually bought the house. I didn't sign. I gave a power of attorney to my dad. He signed the papers because I was on a ship off the, in the Atlantic Ocean. So for most of the time of owning it, I wasn't even in the States. But I learned a lot. It worked out really well. In terms of, we sold it, a year and a half ago, for like 115K. So we turned a profit on it. And I had done it. I did it, your first step, like you fall on your face, but like, heck, I took the first step and I'm still alive. And then from there it was off to the races. Then it was just a matter of finding the deals, finding the capital, and then building the portfolio.
Wow. Yeah. So you mentioned something that's pretty interesting in the beginning, and I just really want to touch on that. You said you picked a property in a town that you've been to only a couple of times. How did you pick that? Was that just like a random choice, or what went into
Yeah.
that?
I think it was one of those like BuzzFeeds, like best towns in America. I don't even know. Like I was on my computer, and so I worked in maintenance department in the squadron that I was stationed, or that I was assigned to. And I'm looking through, and this town pops up, Huntsville, Alabama. And it says, okay, there's a big satellite school for University of Alabama there. And there's a huge military base, and NASA has a large presence there. It's like, well, government money, that's usually pretty solid, right? And so one of my Marines was actually from that town. So, I kind of turned to him and say, hey, like, tell me about it. He's like, well, my dad still lives there. My dad is part of the contractors that build and design Hellfire rockets, which is the rocket used to kill tanks, right? It's an armor piercing rocket. And and I said, well, do you like it? He's like, well, I mean, it's my hometown, but like, it's a good place. And that was it. Like, that's kind of what I did. And then I did spend 3 months trying to find a good property. The one thing I did do is I did a lot of analysis on properties. I ran the numbers a lot. What I didn't do is a lot of background research on the property manager or the realtor who's helping me. And the realtor, they're good to have, right? I'm a realtor, right?
Mhm.
I'm not going to say that we're a dime a dozen. There's definitely good ones and there's bad ones. But your property manager, and I think that the management company and how it's managed and the asset itself are the two most important things. Oh, and the tenant. So that's what I would say is like, and your property management company is going to get you the tenant, but the management company and the tenant are going to keep that asset in good condition. And then by running the numbers and doing your due diligence, you'll make sure you start off with a good asset, but that good asset can turn to crap real quick. If it has a bad tenant in there, or the property management company doesn't know what they're doing, or they're just not attentive to your units.
Yeah, and that's interesting you mentioned that, because I know for a lot of investors who've done a couple of deals, what they'll suggest is that, in the beginning you just self-manage. I know a lot of
Yeah.
people who say that, and just kind of like with your experience. I mean, obviously now you're like a professional property manager, but if you were to go back, like, would you have self-managed, or do you think that was the right choice at the time?
At a distance, I think it would have been difficult, and considering my job at the time, it would have been difficult. So, life circumstances play a big part of that. Um, I specifically manage my own units, and my mentor. So, kind of history of fast forward to where I'm working now. The gentleman who I work for owns the property management company and all of the units that we manage. So he's been in the game for 31 years and has a very, very, very large portfolio, all here in this market. Um, so he started this property management company because he didn't want anyone else managing his units. He wanted to be able to, his managers are his employees, not just like a 1099 or third party kind of a person. So when he comes to our Tuesday meetings, he's going to look you in the eye and ask you why the turn costs were double what they normally are. Or, every meeting we start off like, what's the vacancy rate? And we're above 99 right now. So then the meeting's really lighthearted. But if we're at 95, it's a different kind of meeting, because he wants that control, and he knows that that's been key to keeping his portfolio healthy. I mean, he started in 91. So just think about all the things that happened since then, the downturns we've gone through, and he's grown through all of them. So yeah, kind of from that experience with him and then my own experiences, I think that self-managing is really, really powerful. And I mean, we can get to it here in a second, but house hacking is a great way to start. And there's almost no reason to hire a property manager when you're house hacking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're definitely going to get into that, and some the beginner tips that people can get started with, and some of the things you've learned as well. But I do want to touch on you're kind of working with a mentor right now,
Yeah.
and so working for a property management company with somebody who has that much experience. I mean, I guess obviously you've learned something. So like, what have you actually learned in terms of things that you can be applying, even though
Right.
he might be way further ahead in some people's point of view, but like what are you learning now that you're currently applying in your current investing business?
Yeah. So there's a ton. I think first and foremost, even beyond the mentor, just working in the business has given me experience well beyond my portfolio. And what I mean by that is, at the time I had 4 units. So we sold the duplex in Alabama. I was living in a house type fourplex. And so I had 3 tenants, and I would have one tenant move out, every 2 years or so. Right. I'm not going to get a lot of experience that way. I now have 135 units under management. I've got office space. I've got luxury apartments. I've got class C minus apartments. I've got 1940s built homes. I've got nicer duplexes. So now I have seen a much larger variety of asset classes. I've managed all kinds of tenants, from we have a Airbnb arbitrage, right? I got a guy doing arbitrage. He's one of my tenants. So I've been on the landlord side of that. I've been on the landlord side of evictions. I've been on the landlord side of turns, how expensive they can get, how cheap we can do them, how to minimize vacancies. And then the business side of seeing how this gentleman runs a portfolio. It's crazy how scalable my business and his business are very, 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 very similar, because I'm modeling it that way. But it's not like that him at his size, like it's not like he's doing anything significantly different than what I can do on my size. I just need to scale it appropriately. So examples are like managing it myself. Other examples are some of the terms in our lease. So he in this town, it's very seasonal because of the college students. So he doesn't have any of his leases. They all end between April and July. So you can't have a lease end outside of that. Now you can break your lease, right? But he did that to lower vacancy. Well, I wouldn't have known that had I not worked here and experienced it and seen it, and seen the fact that we're running 99% occupancy because we don't have off-season turns where things sit vacant. So yeah, I think mentors are huge, and if you can, a local mentor with a similar mindset. So this he's a buy and hold guy through and through. That's in his heart. I'm not a flipper. I don't like the idea of turning and burning stuff. It just if I'm going to put that much energy into something, I get attached to it. So yeah, it's a character flaw that I'm not a flipper, right? But just by my nature, like I want to improve it, and I want to keep it, and I want to grow it, and I want to see it continue to do well. And he's a similar mindset. So someone who's local, similar mindset, they don't have to be 100 times ahead of you or have a portfolio that large, but just somebody who's ahead of you that you can kind of model after, I think is worthwhile.
Yeah, and I do kind of want to touch on that in terms of like, were you looking for a mentor at the time, or was this just something that kind of happened as you were fallen into the role of property manager, that you were able to connect with somebody who's have a similar mindset as you?
I was looking for opportunity. So it's funny. I was thinking about this back in the younger days, 18, 19, 20-year-old me. My thought process was, will this make a good story? Let's go do it. Right. Going on, spring breaks or going to a party, like, well, let's make a good story. All right, let's go. Let's have fun. Let's create a story. As I'm getting older and I have a family, it's, is there opportunity here? And then if so, that's the yes, right? That's the green light. Before, the green light was, in a week, if I tell a story, is it going to be awesome? And then now the green light is, in 3 years, will I look back and say, man, that really accelerated me? So I always had an ear out for that. So as an agent, I joined a team when I was only an agent. I joined a team because there was experience there and there was opportunity there. And then I saw more opportunity, more closer to home in terms of the investing side when a job became available here. And I walked in, he said, well, what do you want to make? I said, yeah, I'll worry about pay later. Like that. I know the value I'm going to get out of this is going to be greater than that. And so I honestly, I started off at a per hour that was pretty dang low, and was able just to grow into the position I'm in now. So, it's just looking for opportunities. If you look specifically for a mentor, it's gonna be hard to find. I think that if you add value to somebody, in this case, I filled a position in his company. Probably, at least the way I started, he got a huge discount on me relative to like kind of what my worth is in the marketplace. And so I provide that value to him, and in return, I'm getting the experience. So.
Yeah, wow, that's powerful to have a mentor, and I know this personally as well. Just working with people who are like-minded, who are ahead of you, and that you can actually model after. And something else that I kind of noticed just from our conversation as well is that I think your mindset is really long term. You're always thinking long term, right? With just how you're investing, not flipping, and then also with the opportunities that you're taking and the decisions that you're making as well. And just for people who are listening who might be newer or might be in the game but doing more kind of sporadic, instant gratification, like maybe they're a flipper or a wholesaler, do you think that's the right way to make decisions, or do you think that when it comes to real estate, you should be thinking more long term versus short term?
You need a job, right? Like you need to provide, and then also you need excess to be able to invest. So if you can't do that in your day job, then I think you should look at those ways to generate that cash. Or if your day job just covers your basic expenses, because maybe you got a family of 5, or for you, you've got 3 or 4 kids. And so you're like, okay, my job covers our basic expenses, but I need more money in order to invest. So I'm going to flip on the side, use the proceeds from the flip to long-term buy and hold or BRRRR or something like that. But the value or the ROI on the long-term hold, the appreciation, the leverage that's available to a long-term buy and hold, the tax advantages, those all seem small, especially when you compare it to, hey, I can put, 20 grand or 50 grand of my own money plus some hard money into a flip, and I can make 30 grand off it. That's huge, right? The ROI instantaneously is huge, but the marginal gains, the 1% gains here and there of the long-term hold, I think are going to create much more value to you in the long term. And then particularly to like generational wealth. Because the problem with flipping is if you go down, you can't flip anymore. If for some reason you're just not mentally able to do something, if you have a kid and the kid has special needs and now you got to focus on the kid, you're not making that money anymore. So that's going to dry up pretty quick. But if you got long-term buy and hold, you can press pause on expansion and growth. You can press pause on really driving rents, and your asset will still be there and it'll be just as healthy as it was the day that you kind of put on pause.
Right. I mean, like flipping it's just a job, really, right? It's more like, you're getting a job, and in some some cases you might even be less stable than a job, because the job you can actually get the same income every month. Where you're running a flipping business, you don't really know what income you're going to get this month, next month. So
like, it's like being an agent. I think I relate flipping to being an agent almost exactly the same, right? You're doing the same thing. Agents are going and finding clients. Flippers are finding sellers, right? And then you are working it for some period of time, and you're getting a great return on that specific person you found. But it's what you don't see, what you don't realize is all the work that's done to get that one client or to get that one flip is a ton of work, and you don't necessarily know the payoff is going to be there. There's a lot of faith in that system. So yeah, I mean, so on the side, I'm an agent, right? That's kind of like me flipping. I think if I wasn't an agent, I might be a flipper in that sense, but I don't have the capacity. Maybe I'm just not as capable as some, but I don't have the capacity to manage my portfolio, grow it, flip, go ahead, take on clients and give them what they deserve while providing the value to my 40-hour a week job. So yeah, I think that I do a side hustle. In this case, it happens to be an agent, but wholesaling, flipping, short-term rentals, stuff like that are all great ways to drive revenue as like a side hustle or even a full-time job.
Yeah. I mean, that's a perfect comparison. Like flipping is exactly like being an agent, right? You're almost working on commissions, but you're just getting the profit from, your own investment in that case. Right. They're short-term gains, they're instant gratification. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people, right, in real estate, whether they're just starting out or they've even been in the game for a while, where they just run these businesses, whether if they're just full-time agents or, they're a full-time flipper, or there's full-time wholesalers out there, believe it or right. I mean, have you worked with somebody where, you as an agent, you're representing them, maybe they're looking for a flip, and, what do you think their thought process is, where they think they're in real estate to build the wealth, but they're not really realizing that, they don't have an exit strategy, and that they're just kind of in it for the income portion?
Most people realize it. I don't think that, I don't think people are deceiving themselves. It's it's kind of like your retirement versus your trading account, your E-Trade account or whatever else, right? That when you dabble in like day trading, that's not the same as your 401k. Like you're not kidding yourself thinking that like those are the same thing. You might have the mindset that you can build enough income that you can kind of overcome the savings needed or the investments required, right? Okay, well, if I can get my income to, $500,000 a year, then I'll be set no matter what. And there's some truth to that, right? There's no limit to the ceiling. There's no cap to how much you can make in a lot of these jobs where you're working for yourself, flippers, real estate agents, wholesalers. So yeah, most of the people I've worked with when they're flipping, they're flipping because they know that it's going to generate that quick profit. And I think they know the value of the buy and hold as well. Most folks seem to have both going on.
Mhm.
I've heard of stories though, of course, like flippers who are like wake up one day, realize they've been flipping for 10 years. They've made all this kind of money. And then, they only have like 2 rental properties. It's like you
Yeah.
flipped 1,000 homes and you've only kept 2. Like, I can't imagine, but
Yeah, and I mean, you from an agent's perspective, I guess, what do you think the ratio should be if somebody wants to get into a full time, right? Like one flip to 2 rentals or 2 flips to 1 rental.
very market specific, I think. I think it comes down to finances, right? So,
Mhm.
um, profit first, kind of pay yourself first kind of a deal. So figure out what you want your savings rate to be to hit your goal. So I mean, it kind of goes back to that. Like, what is the goal?
Mhm.
What's the saving rates for that goal? And there's different goals, right? So I have retirement goals. I've got 10-year goals and I've got 3 years goals. So what do I need to pay myself to hit my retirement goal? What do I need to pay myself to hit my 10-year goal? What do I need to pay myself to hit my 3 year goal? And then even shorter than that, what do I have to pay myself to be able to go on a vacation in 3 months? Right. And that all goes into that's what you add that up and you find out what that total is. And then you say, okay, what are my requirements to live off of housing, food, your car, your basic expenses. And then now you just have a total. So now it's pretty simple, right? How much flipping do I have to do? Well, I have to do enough flipping that I can cover those, fill those buckets. And if you got a day job, then my day job fills up, 70% of the bucket. So I've got another 30% I got to go find. But yeah, I think it's a matter of sitting down with your situation, where you want to be, how fast you want to grow, what your goals are. Very, very goal mindset. So I think you always start there. You always start with the end in mind and then reverse engineer it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just a really good way to kind of make decisions, right? Like one of the
Right.
biggest issues for anybody is that indecisiveness kind of that's the main issue for not getting things done.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. If you don't know um, where you're going, it's really just get in the car
mhm.
and get lost.
Yeah,
But if you got an end in mind, even if it's just generally, I know I should be going south, then you know that which direction you need to turn when you come to a fork in the road, right? I need to go the direction that most leads towards south, like whatever that might be, and I'll at least end up somewhere where I want to be. In this case, as an investor, um, generally speaking, that's probably like, hey, I want passive cash flow. Like that might be south, right? That's not a number of units, not a numerical value to that. Just like I want cash flow. So then, as you're making your decisions, when you do have that flip, if you're a flipper or if you're an agent and you have that extra 10 grand that comes in that month, you can at least pause and go, wait, I want cash flow. All right, this 10 grand, what do I do with it that creates that cash flow? And that would be like, okay, 5 of it goes into this bank account till I can save up 40 grand and then go buy an investment property. And now I've got cash flow and I've got long-term investments.
yep. And when it comes to making decisions, like how I guess like how specific do you get? Are you living for like a specific number, or like you said,
Yeah.
just cash flow is okay?
Yeah. So I nerd out way more than that. Right. So like,
Yeah.
maybe it's my, from 9 years being in the Marine Corps, and just being very detailed in your planning. Um, I plan out very specifically. So I want a better than 15% annualized return on a
Mhm.
5 year time horizon for all of my investments. Um, and now I know it's like, wait, Greg, you just said you're going to buy and hold and you don't want to ever sell. Why are you talking about 5 years? Like that seems more short sighted. 5 years allows me to compare different assets to each other on a timeline that makes sense, where all those assets should mature. So over a 5 year time frame, I can compare um, Bitcoin to the S&P 500 to self storage to short term rentals to a fourplex. Um, I can build out a model of that. I can put in my assumptions, and then I can see what my 5 year return is going to be. And if it's 15% or better, then I'm going down that road. If that's my only option, then it passes my test and I'll pull a trigger. Or I'm comparing 2 things and okay, this one gets 15, this one gets 25. We're going to lean towards the 25, as long as it's risk adjusted. That's the other thing too, is you got to figure out how risky this thing is you're going into, because Bitcoin, for example, you can make a lot on Bitcoin. You can lose a lot on Bitcoin. Um, if we go back to house hacking, it's very hard to absolutely lose yourself with a house hack. it's almost always going to come out positive. So it's a very, very low risk and a relatively high return. So that's a pretty good risk adjusted return for that.
Yeah, well, okay, well that's good that you brought that up because let's talk a little bit about house hacking, right? Like, you I think you're an avid house hacker. You've done
Yeah.
more than one of those, and for those people getting started, can you just tell us a little bit more about like your journey with house hacking and some advice and suggestions for, whether or not this is probably the best way to get started, right, as a real estate
Yeah.
investor?
I mean, it really could be the only tool in your toolbox, and you could retire early, have generational wealth and everything else. Like it's ridiculously powerful for a lot of reasons. I think the main one being that owner occupied houses just have such great terms with them that it blows all other investment opportunities out of the
Mhm.
water because you're able to leverage safely. So now combine that with someone paying down your mortgage, right? So the U.S. Government and the U.S. in general likes to encourage home ownership, right? It's kind of something we've been founded on historically as a country. It's been very important to our country for colonization, for expansion. You go back 200 years. Texas, for example, has a ton of advantages to being a homeowner because they were trying to get people down to Texas. It wasn't a place that people were really headed. But they knew that if they could get people to move down here, it would be very powerful for the state. And then they found oil, and of course, then it became huge. But with a house hack, you combine that leverage, that power um, with income. And so my first house hack was a fourplex. Um, I like the fourplexes. We kind of talked a little bit before we got on the podcast. For me, it was a mini apartment. And so my goal is to get into apartments, get into multifamily. I like the scalability. My mentor has a lot of single family homes and duplexes, and there's a lot of issues with that. There's a lot of overhead that results in having a portfolio that's that spread out on these onesies and twosies, and now you got onesies and twosies times hundreds. It makes it difficult for maintenance, makes it difficult to know the layout of houses, stuff like that. So knowing that I wanted to go into multifamily and go that direction, I ended up doing a 20% down kind of conventional mortgage. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was making no income at the time. It made it a little more difficult to get like an FHA loan or even a VA loan. But in either case, I had enough savings that I was able to put that 20% down, renovate 3 of the units. And my PITI, so my mortgage payment was right around 1,700, and I was averaging $800 per month in rent for those 3 units. So I was bringing in 24, paying the bank 17, and that was in the middle of COVID. So I had no income. I was a real estate agent that hadn't sold a house yet. So that would have been, April, May of 2020. Our savings rate was dwindling because we had just bought this fourplex. And when I got those tenants in there, my ability, like basically I was at that point, I could have retired. Now I would have retired very, 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 very cheaply. Right. I didn't have a ton of money. Like I would have to live off of a couple $100s a month. But I theoretically could have right there been like, okay, I'm just gonna live a super simplistic lifestyle, eat ramen noodles for the rest of my life, and I'd be fine. We have a little bit higher aspirations than that, so that's not where we stopped. But that's just the power of the house hack. And fourplexes were the best option for me because not only did it introduce me to multifamily, but you have 3 streams of income. So even if I had a vacancy, I didn't have to cover the mortgage that month because 2 of my tenants brought in $1,600. I was only paying 17. So a month-long vacancy didn't crush me.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I don't think a lot of people realize that is that the difference between house hacking a fourplex and the house hacking like, you know, a duplex or just a room is that you're not having multiple streams of income, right?
Right.
You're almost betting against the vacancy rate there. So that's
Right.
actually a really powerful tool. And do you suggest somebody house hack, maybe like I know people who house hack like single family even, and they just rent out the rooms, like
Yeah.
would you suggest even doing that, or is that should you just only be looking for those opportunities where they're almost the prime opportunities for house hacking?
So house hacking is I think of it like as a spectrum, And it's like, how involved do you want to be? And what is both how involved you want to be and what lifestyle are you looking for? So our second house hack was a single family home that we rented out a bedroom in that home on Airbnb. So it was a live-in flip. So we bought it. We did extensive renovations to it. And then we put it on Airbnb, that room, with no access to the rest of the house. The door locked to the rest of the house, and they had their own entrance. And that covered my mortgage payment. So now I'm in a much bigger house, right? I'm not in a 2-bedroom apartment. I'm in a 3-bedroom, 2,000 square foot home with a 2-car garage and a great backyard. And I'm still living for free. And we even took it one step further. We bought an Airstream, put it in the backyard, put that on Airbnb. And that's when our neighborhood got involved and shut us down. But that's more about due diligence than it is house hacking. Yeah. But yeah, so I think that if you're 45 years old and you've got 3 kids, and you're not ready to move into a 1980s duplex infested with cockroaches, because we battled a lot of cockroaches, then you can very easily just find a house that has an in-law suite, that has that spare bedroom that you're not going to use, and house hack that. My sister-in-law lives in a duplex I helped her buy. It's a 3-3 per side. So she's got a 1,200 square foot 3-bedroom house, just like anyone else her age. She's in her mid 20s. The only difference is it's attached to another 3-bedroom house that covers 3/4 of her mortgage. So then that's great for her and for her fiance, because they've got full-time jobs and they're not as crazy about real estate. They know the power of it. So they've got a neighbor who they go fix things for every once in a while, and that neighbor pays them money, right? It's not really different than having a neighbor who's just like always calling you up, like, oh, my toilet's like, stopped up. Can you help me out? And you're just being a good neighbor, except in this case, you're also getting paid for it. So that's much more hands off. You don't have to do any Airbnb stuff for that. You don't have to do any, you don't have to create an LLC, nothing crazy. You just have half your house that you rent out. So it's all a matter of where you're at in life and what your comfort level is.
Yeah. And I mean, that kind of goes back into like we're talking about earlier, right? Like the long-term thinking. I mean, right. It's just a sacrifice you have to make, right? Like it's a lifestyle sacrifice you're making now for a better lifestyle in the future. Is that how you think about it?
Yeah. Sacrifice like has such a negative connotation to it. I think that when you haven't house hacked before, you're going to think about all the negatives that come with, like, oh man, like, we originally thought like, oh man, our tenants are going to know that we're the landlord. Like that's going to make things really awkward. It wasn't awkward at all. Like there wasn't even when I served my tenant with an eviction, and they were my neighbor. Right. And they had someone living there that shouldn't have been living there. And that person who was living there that shouldn't have been living there, his car wouldn't start. And I jumped his car for him. And that wasn't awkward. Okay, let's think about this. I'm literally kicking them out of the house because they haven't paid rent in a month and a half. This guy is a big part of that reason, because he shouldn't have moved in because he was never on the lease. And they've got like, I think like 2 weeks at that point. Like their deadline before we actually went to court for the eviction was about 2 weeks out. And I'm helping him jump his car, and it wasn't awkward. So the idea of the sacrifice, I think it's mostly just like where are you comfortable living? And there's a house hack that allows you to live that lifestyle. You just have to know what you're looking for, whether it's that in-law suite and you have somebody, like I said, the Airbnb, or like an above the garage apartment, that's really hands off. And, now you're if you can lower your mortgage by 25, 30%, we just talked about those buckets, right? Now my housing bucket just got that much smaller. So now my investment bucket can handle that much more, right? And I can put an extra $1,000 towards an investment savings every month, $12,000, in 3 years period, you can buy an investment property every 3 years, and you didn't change your lifestyle at all. That's the power of the house hack, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that the word sacrifice, people just don't like to, they don't like it, but it really, what it really means is just giving up something good or giving up something now to get something even better in the future,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
So I think that's how it is. And that's a that's a really interesting story that you told about the tenant that you had to evict. And it sounded like, everything went well in that situation. But I mean, have you ever ran into a situation where, it was like a bad tenant? It was, or have you heard a story of somebody
Oh
else
yeah.
house hacking?
Yeah. Not with house hacks. I haven't heard of anything.
Okay.
I mean, if you're a good person, and like there wasn't any point where we were like wronging them. We weren't spiting them. We weren't like cutting their, which is illegal by the way, but we weren't cutting their electric off because they weren't paying rent, anything like that. It was a pretty simple thing. It was like, hey, like you didn't pay last month, and I need tenants that pay, so you're gonna have to leave, or I'm gonna have to get the courts involved, right? It was just a pretty basic conversation. Um, I've had problem tenants, both in my job here as a manager and with our own portfolio. Um, and the best thing, so even if you're going to house hack, getting a really good lease um, is pretty crucial. So here in Texas, I deal with two different leases. One is the Texas Apartment Association. You have to, as a property manager, as a landlord, you got to buy into it, and it's fairly expensive, but it's a very thorough lease. And then if you're dealing with a realtor, you can use the Texas Association of Realtors form, and that's a really good one in terms of what it covers. Um, in 99% of situations you run into with a tenant, you simply go, hey, let's go to page 5 real quick. Paragraph 4. Paragraph 4 says you can't have a grill that close to the property. So either you need to move your grill or I'm gonna have to fine you. Like it's pretty simple right here. And then if you continue to not follow the rules, and we go to paragraph 17, it says, that we have grounds to evict you if you aren't following the rules. I don't want to go down that path. So can we just move the grill? And this way you're not like the Karen landlord who's like, you shouldn't have a grill so close to your house. Like you don't ever want to be that person. You just keep it. We both made an agreement when we signed a contract. Like you show me the paragraph that I'm not doing, and I'll fix my wrongs. Like I'm equally required to uphold this contract as you are. So if something's not fixed, let me know, because it's my responsibility to make those repairs in a timely manner. To the same extent, like you're not supposed to leave trash on your back porch. Like it's one of our rules.
Yeah. And it just comes down to like not leaving anything to the imagination or to judgment, right? To argument. So once you have it written down on a lease, there's no argument, right? That's what they signed. So,
yep.
And
Yeah, I think if you combine that too with being open and honest. Another quick story. I had a tenant who moved in, and she was higher maintenance. And she was She moved in a unit that we just renovated, and she had complaints about everything. This drawer sticks a little bit. I don't know about the siding. It looks like water might get in. I think you should replace the siding because water might get in. There was no signs of any water damage, and it's been like that for 5+ years. So clearly wasn't the case, but everything seemed to tick them off. And then they started complaining about their neighbors, and they're in a fourplex. They were complaining about the noise and all this and that, and they've got a study. And so the conversation quickly became like, you should not be living in a fourplex. Like clearly I allowed you to live in a place that you're not happy living in, and you chose a place to live in that you're not happy with because you're very sensitive to sounds around you. And I can't stop your neighbors from making noise. Like if the neighbor upstairs puts on stilettos, it's going to make noise on your ceiling. It's part of living in a multifamily dwelling. There's a lot of inexpensive non-multifamily dwellings. It's why mobile home parks do so well. Like you don't have people above you, left or right of you. It's a similar asset to a inexpensive fourplex, and a great option for folks who need that space. So the conversation went really quickly to, you're not happy here, and it's time for you to leave. And so in that case, I gave her a deadline because we were still within the renting season, and she only been there for about a month. I said, hey, if you move out in the next 2 weeks, then there won't be any negative effects of that. You'll get your security deposit back minus any damages, and there won't be any extra fees for breaking your lease early because we both allowed this to happen. I'm as equally at fault as they are. And then we can move on. 2 weeks later, she was gone. I'm bringing in a tenant, and the tenant hasn't once brought up any, of these little issues, right? Um, so all that to be said is the conversation wasn't ever, um, you know, um, spiteful. There was never any kind of negative tones about it. It was, she was clearly unhappy. I had to figure out why she was unhappy and then solve the problem. Um, and that's one of the things I learned here as being a property manager. I learned from um, both the owner and then the president of the company here is just having those conversations with people, um, teaching them. They made a mistake, and we made a mistake. We should have screened you better because clearly you're not a good fit for this property. And then now know don't look at fourplexes. Like that's pretty simple.
Yeah, and you bring up screening, right? Screening, I think it's an important part of anybody who's a landlord who owns rental properties. When it comes to house hacking, obviously with a fourplex, the issue of safety, it's a fourplex, right? It's not the same as somebody renting a room out in a single family. But when it comes to house hacking, does the screening process become all the more important, where you're actually putting more effort into it because you're going to be living with some of these folks for a while?
So screening is always important, super important, probably maybe the most important thing, because screening will affect how you receive your house back, right? Because what you're doing is you're giving away your biggest asset. In this case, especially as a new person, like you're giving away that house that you just saved 3 years to buy, and you're putting it in someone else's hands for 2 to 3 years. And then they're going to give it back in some condition. And the only way that you can have any indication of what condition you're going to get that house back in is in that week-long process of you screening that tenant. So yeah, living in one and being safe is important. I would say that of the people that we screened that we declined, I felt safe around them. So like maybe my standard for a tenant is higher than my standard for being safe, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of really, really good people that don't meet our requirements, just because our requirements are so strict. And I don't think they're that strict relative to what I've seen or what I've been told, or, in terms of like, you'll hear it a lot that a tenant should make 3 times 1 month's rent. A tenant should have a 600 credit score. A tenant should have 2 good years of rental history. I think the difference is you hold those standards, you don't waver on those standards, and you actually screen the standards. There's a lot of people who have those standards and then they don't call the employer to make sure the tenant actually makes that money, or they don't call the past landlord. We would call the past landlord. We are going to make sure, how often did they pay rent late? Did they ever have any checks bounced? Did they have pets that weren't on the lease? Did they have occupants there that weren't on the lease? And then most importantly, like, would you rent to them again? And we're confirming all that stuff. I wish I could remember his name. There's a gentleman who's on the Biggerpockets podcast a lot. He's out of DC and he does Section 8. And he actually goes to the applicant's house to see how they live now before he'll move them into his unit. Like that's probably, it's crossed my mind. It's crossed my mind to be like, I want to see how you're living now, because that's the best indication of how you're going to leave my house. Because even if a tenant's paying on time, they can still leave a place, and a turn can be $500 or it can be $5,000 real quick. And it's difficult to know which one it's going to be.
Yeah. And does that kind of make it all the better to self-manage?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know all my tenants because it's just my wife and I managing it. Like either myself or my wife showed that tenant. So I saw them, and I don't hide who I am as the owner. I don't, you can play the game of like the property manager and there's the owner who's someone else. Hey, I'm your manager. I'm your owner. The buck stops with, the puck stops with me, so to speak. So if there is something that needs to be done, I'll let you know if it can be done, when it's going to be done, and I'll be responsible for getting it done. But yeah, I think that's super helpful. There's a lot of property management companies who are excited about their low vacancy rate, but they might not uphold that screening as necessary. And then similarly with like rent rates, Um, on the streets that I have fourplexes, I'm $100 over my competition that is equivalently kind of fixed up. Um, and I don't have vacancies. It's just I'm putting those rates out there. I'm um, patient with it, and I'm just getting better rental rates because I care. Um, I care more. Not that the big property managers don't care. They're just not going to care quite as much as me, because that's my life savings. That's my retirement plan. That's my generational wealth. To a property manager who works 9 to 5, that's 1/100th of their monthly income. Nah, and it's $100 a month, like whatever.
Right. And you mentioned a comparison in there. And I think, when it comes down to it, I want to kind of like know your answer to this. So let's just say it's a slow rent season, right? Whether it's the economy or, how the housing market's doing, whatever. Would you rather have a vacancy, but uphold those screening standards? Or would you rather lower the screening standards, but fill your property?
Right. So you kind of have you have two levers to affect the vacancy, right? Because it's all about supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
So if your rent rate is $1,000 a month and it's a slow rent season, so the supply is down, the supply is at that $1,000 a month, level. And because your requirements are where they're at, now there's this small section of the demographics that can actually afford your property. Now you can lower your standards, keep your rent where it's at, and get more people. Therefore, sorry, I was saying supply, increase your demand, right? Mm-hmm. So the demand side. So I can increase the demand by lowering my standards. So now there's more people that can demand what I have available, or I can lower the rent rate. I'd rather lower the rent rate, mm-hmm. And have a higher quality tenant. So quick math on that. If I lower my rent rate by $100 a month and that person stays for 2 years, that's $2,400, right? That I lost. If I lower my standard and I have to evict that person, no way I get out of that situation better off than $3,000. By the time they stop paying me, by the time I have to go to the court, by the time I have to fix all the repairs they did in there and everything else, there's almost no chance I'm under $5,000. So it's going to seem like you've got a lot lower cash flow, but again, that long-term picture, in 4 years, you'll have more money in your pocket if you lower your rent slightly, but keep those standards high.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not just a money thing, right? It also comes down to the other two factors, right? When it comes to making a decision, which is your time right. that you spend, and the stress or the emotional aspect of it, right? Yeah. Does that kind of come down to that too?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you put someone in there and you're the whole time you're like, oh, I don't know, then for the next 2 years, every time he calls you for maintenance, or every first of the month, you'll be like, is he gonna? And then the 5th of the month comes around, you're like, he still hasn't. And then you got to put the eviction letter, and then he finally pays. Yeah, I had a tenant where every single month for 2 years, we put an eviction letter on his door, and he'd always pay on like the 15th, which is the day that we usually go to the courts to file the eviction. So like every single month, I had this one guy of all my 130 properties, and I'm going, is he going to pay? I haven't heard from him again. And then on the 15th, money would come in. But yeah, that was not somebody who and he wasn't a bad tenant. He's just always late like that. But that's because he was so financially strapped, and he probably shouldn't have been, he shouldn't have passed the screening. Most likely we might've missed something. But yeah, that stress is not worth it, particularly when if you're early on in your game and that's your only property, and you're just sitting there waiting for that one check to come in so that you can pay your mortgage. Well, mortgage is due on the 5th, and this guy doesn't pay till the 15th. So now you've got to rearrange your budget to be able to cover that difference. And right. Yeah, I would not recommend it.
Right. And then the other thing is time, right? Where, the time you're spending to go in and, do the task of eviction, going to court.
Yeah.
That could be time you're putting towards, with you, like your realtor, you could be putting towards generating more side income or finding a new property.
Right.
So it's actually costing you money at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Which all that being said, if you screen well, there's tenants who I don't even know. You know what I mean? Like if you screen well, there are tenants who are going to leave the property better than I provided it to them. I just know they're going to clean up better than I had it cleaned even though I had it professionally cleaned. Mm-hmm. And so knowing that, and then two, I pre-lease, right? So I highly recommend pre-lease. We do 4 months out. So people have to tell us 4 months beforehand whether they're going to renew or not. If they don't renew, then we start marketing the property. I'm making a judgment call right then and there on how long I need to turn that property to get it ready for the next tenant base. Usually a week is solid. But if it's completely trashed, I'm going to be running into a situation where my next tenant wants to move in, and I'm going to start that relationship off going, you can't move in because I'm not done yet. So if I know my tenant base is good, then I can keep that timeline shorter between my pre-lease unit and the end of that current lease. But if I'm nervous about all my tenants because my screening was weaker, I'm going to push it out to 2 or 3 weeks because I'm not quite sure what condition I'm going to get that place back in. So yeah, I mean, screening, buying right is the most important first step. And then if you could focus on one thing after that, it'd be screening. Yeah. Like the 2 steps to long-term buy and holds. Buy it right so the numbers make sense, and then screen.
Yeah. Well, that's very valuable insights for a lot of people who are just getting started, right? What's the second, like they always know, like you got to buy it right? The asset's got to be the right one, but what's the next step when it comes to managing? It will, there it is. Greg just told you, it's screening. So
yeah. Pay the money to do the background checks, the credit checks, like absolutely pass it on to the as a fee to the application, but don't skip that. People will tell you their credit score is 750 and it'll come back 550.
Yeah, and then maybe they just had an eyesight problem, right?
Right? You'll get all the stories. You'll get every single story in the book about oh well, I went through a divorce 5 years ago and my credit's never been the same, and it's like, well, that doesn't account for the credit card that you took out last month that you haven't paid back yet. But
yeah. Right. And kind of going back into the house hacking, I kind of want to ask you this question. It's just that, when you're, doing what you're doing now with all of your real estate operations, right? I guess aside from being a property manager, which because that's more of a job gig
right.
than, you're doing on your own. But when it comes to your current real estate operations and what you're doing with house hacking, are you doing it on your own, or are you doing it, I think you said, with your wife, with a partner. So how does that kind of all work out with, how your team is running?
Right. Yeah. So we, the first house we bought was a partnership with my dad. I think that he was testing me out, which is smart because I wasn't proven, right? And so when I basically told him, hey, this is what we're selling it for, this is the profit we're going to make, he was then ready to tap into more of his retirement, diversify outside of the stocks that he currently owned into real estate because he didn't have any real estate besides his primary residence at that time. Kind of our progression went, we bought the fourplex. After buying the fourplex and proving it a little bit there, we sold the duplex in Alabama, used that money to buy a duplex here in College Station. And then that went well. Was it 3 months after buying that, we bought 3 more fourplexes in College Station. We've owned those for a year. And I mean, we bought right before all this crazy inflation and everything. So it's appreciated really handsomely. And then since then we did our live-in flip with the house hack with Airbnb, and then bought another single family rental, owner financing, which we could go into that long story there. But yeah, if you want to grow in this market, creative financing, listen to, there's a whole podcast on it, but owner financing was really, really good for us. So 30-year fixed, 10% down on a 5% interest rate. And our closing costs were $3,000 less than they normally are because I don't have all those bank fees. You just pay a lawyer to generate the loan documents. So yeah, we've got a partner on, like I said, three of the four plexes in the duplex. He's looking to invest with us some more, and that's my dad. My wife and I manage everything. We use Buildium as our software. As a real estate agent, I also list everything on the MLS, which is good. Makes showings easier. And then we are looking to expand. And I think probably my next thing will be figuring out how to hire a VA. We are starting to try to systematize more and more. And those, before that, we've got a bookkeeper. So that was big. Actually, in the last 2 months, we hired a bookkeeper. My wife was doing that, and she's very intelligent with it, but she's self-taught. So there's a lot of stuff we were missing that made it more difficult on our CPA. So now there's 5 hours a month we got back because we are letting somebody else deal with all the receipts. And when you've got a property management company owned in an LLC, so we have Precision Apartments is our LLC there. It manages my personal assets and Schwartz Family Realty, which is my LLC partnership with my dad. So now you've got these three entities that are all working together, and they've all got different expenses, and they all pay for different things. When you get to that level of complication, which honestly isn't probably that complicated relative to some folks, but when you're at the point where you've got three entities, it's worthwhile to grab a bookkeeper and let them do their thing. So that's our team right now, is the two of us and the bookkeeper, and then hoping to do a VA as we expand to the next level.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you don't actually currently work with a VA right now. Just
not
curious.
Yet. No.
Okay. Yeah.
You have a VA?
Yes. Well, we've worked with a couple of VAs, and so maybe we'll talk a little bit more about how we can help you with that after the interview here. But I was just curious, because most real estate investors, agents, they'll just that's they'll, before they even do a deal or release a piece of content, is I already have a VA. So I'm just curious.
No, we'll probably use them for our marketing. I'm looking to expand to find more off-market opportunities. I think that's probably the most scalable thing. So it'll be screening, getting the list, having them run the list, screen the list, maybe even take phone calls initially just to get that initial information, and then hand it off to us so that I'm not taking phone calls in the middle of the day and stuff like that. But that's probably for my business to grow. Marketing is the next step. And so that's one part that we really haven't done a lot for. Deal Machine is the closest we've gotten. So driving for dollars, sending out postcards using the Deal Machine app, which is a great, easy to use app. So we've got like 200 or so mailers going out. That's how we got that last single family home. But in order to scale the way we want to, and really to help my real estate business as an agent and as an investor, marketing is going to be key.
Yep. Yeah, it really is. And I do want to touch on something else that you mentioned as well, which is the financing aspect of it. I kind of want to touch on that for just house hacking, and just creative financing in general. So when it comes to house hacking, right, I've heard if you can't, first of all, the financing terms on those are just much better. Right. But if you can't get it, right, like without an income, or if I know a lot of people who are just getting into college, they want to do the house hacking thing. Do you suggest getting a cosigner on that, or how should they approach it?
Yeah. So if you're at the college age kind of level, it's probably best to go with a cosigner. Always go to a mortgage broker and talk to them. Get somebody who's experienced as a mortgage broker, so that they've seen enough things that they've got more, kind of tools up their sleeve. The more experienced they are, just the more options they'll be able to present to you. If you've got any kind of income, FHA is really, really friendly. As a new home buyer, you're 3.5% down. So you don't have to have a ton of capital saved up. So maybe you got that first job where you're making $40,000 a year. You can get pre-approved for quite a lot, as long as you didn't go buy a $50,000 Beamer. Book recommendation set for life. I think that you kind of go through the initial owner occupied loans, see what's available to you. And then, hey, if I can't qualify, ask your mortgage broker, hey, if I get a cosigner, what will that look like? We had a cosigner on that fourplex we bought because I didn't have any income. So my mother-in-law is a cosigner on that. We're about to refinance her back out. So after owning it for 2.5 years, we'll refinance her out and pull out most of our capital as well. So kind of like a long-term burr there. But yeah, so anything house hack, VA, FHA, first-time home buyers. And then there's other products that are like 3% down that aren't necessarily FHA. They're more conventional through Freddie and Fannie. And a mortgage broker will help you with all those kind of options. I've even heard of, what do they call it? Not a kiddie FHA. The gist of it is there's a product out there where like the home can be in your name, but your parents can co-sign on it. And still have it be like an FHA kind of a product. So I'm not super knowledgeable on that. But yeah, I would definitely start there. As much as you can use conventional residential financing. 30-year fixed is really important in where we're at in our economy, where inflation and rates are going crazy. Having something fixed for 30 years is really comforting. If you can't, because you've already because you don't have the income, or you've already used all your ability based on debt to income for kind of conventional 30-year fixed, then you can move into the commercial world. So for us, purchasing an LLC, we chose to go commercial financing. Your conventional financing generally won't lend you into an LLC. So you have to buy in your personal name and then move it into an LLC. There's a lot on Biggerpockets about that, but with my dad's comfort level, we decided, hey, let's just go get a commercial loan. So for us, that's a 20-year amortization on a 5-year adjustable rate mortgage at 4.25% is what we had for our last one. I'm sure it's gone up since then. So the cash flow is not as strong because of the amortization being so much shorter. But like I said, I look at IRR, and my annualized return is just as strong because the rates are very manageable and I'm paying down so much principal. Then from there, or maybe even similar to that, if you are doing direct to seller marketing, always see what the seller wants. The seller of the single family home we got, she did not want to deal with her horrible tenants that she had in place, and she wanted a paycheck every month to go along with the Social Security she was getting. So it was pretty easy. Hey, we said, okay, we can give you basically $650 a month. You'll have first position on the house, and that was something that she was really looking forward to and excited about. So now she gets a check. She doesn't worry about crappy tenants. She doesn't worry about evictions. She doesn't worry about whether they paid or not. She was actually nervous. She was a widow. She was nervous about the tenants that were in there because she was afraid if she evicted them, they might, because they know where she lives because they mail her checks every month. She was afraid that they might come after her or something like that. I don't know if I think she might've been a little bit of a nervous Nelly, but here I come and okay, well, I'll mail you a check every month. And you don't have to worry about these problem tenants anymore. And she was much more comfortable with me mailing her a check than her tenants. And that became a pretty easy transaction. So owner financing, super, super powerful. And then you go down hard money and stuff like that. Interest rates gets pretty high, usually better used for like flippers and stuff. But if you're going to do a burr and you're pretty comfortable in your numbers, then you can go get private money or hard money, but just expect to pay like 10% or more. So that's all I know about financing, right? That was 15 minutes. So always call a mortgage broker, always reach out to people who are doing it. Particularly like, if you want to do owner financing, find somebody who did it, read a book up on it before you try to just jump in and make it up as you go.
Yep. But like from what I heard, all the different options, right? And that's what a lot of people say is that not having money should not be an excuse.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, they're if you know it's a good deal, right, there's a way to get it financed that'll make it work for you. So I go through the gamut. I mean, we're about to try a new one with some multifamily, which is a master lease option. Um, Essentially where we would, it's kind of like a lease with an option to sell, right? So we would take over the property as if we were owners, but ownership would never exchange hands. We would set a price, and then at some deadline in the future, we would pay that price. Now, what that allows us to do is that allows us to increase the rents, make the units more efficient, make them more lendable, right? Because they're not making a lot of money right now, so banks don't want to lend on them. But if I can increase the rents, so now the rents are at a higher rate, the bank will look more favorable on it, and I will be able to get the appropriate debt to pay the price that the seller wants to sell at, right? Because he wants to sell at a price based on what it could rent for, not what it is renting for. Well, I can pay the price of what it could rent for as long as I have the ability to control the asset to get those prices up to market, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's not something I would have thought of before, a year ago. That wouldn't have been on my mind. But as I look at these assets and I learn more things from books and podcasts and everything else, I start to try these new tools. And so that's the next one we're going to try.
Yeah. Yeah. Always be experimenting and trying new things, right? I mean, that's how you get started.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And just one last thing, man. I mean, you live in you're a real estate agent. You live in a Bryan College Station. So for people who are outside of Texas or don't know, that's a big college town.
Yeah.
Do you work with a lot of college students looking to invest or families who are looking to help their kid out with house hacking?
Not as often as I thought. I'm probably not marketing to the right people. I know that there's a lot of parents that buy condos and stuff for their kids, and that's a great market here in College Station. I haven't tied into that as much as I probably could. I do work with a lot of young folks who are getting into it, who have their first job, looking their first house, and they want their first house to be an investment, be a house hack. And then some out-of-state folks. Being prior service, a lot of my buyers are prior service. They see that kind of in my resume. I think they are attracted to that because I've bought a house while deployed. So I understand the complications with being active duty and trying to invest out of state. And I can, the pains that I had when I did it, I can now fix those so that they don't go through those similar things while they're making those initial jumps into real estate. But yeah, lots of house hackers. I talk to a lot of college kids. We have a meetup. A lot of them come out. Some of them are just still learning in the learning process. A few of them do, I know, end up buying. But yeah, it's not as many as I'd like. I wish everybody could.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to the education process, right? We need to be teaching it more, preaching it more, getting the information out there.
Exactly.
Just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. My mindset for when I was in college, it just clearly you've got to be rich to be able to buy an investment property. And for me to buy my own house is impossible because I'm just a college kid. And then you stop, right? But you make the assumption and you stop without education, then you have no idea, right? I challenge all of your assumptions. And until 5 people tell you no, and people you trust, and there doesn't appear to be anything on the internet that says otherwise, because the internet's always gonna have something that says otherwise, right? Someone on TikTok will be like, I was just 3 years old. I bought my first investment property with no money down. Like, did you, dude? Like, cool for you if you did. 1 in 300 million, congrats. But if there's enough people out there going, hey, I was in college when I bought my first house, and there's tons of them that do say that, and then there's something behind it. So you just have to ask enough people until someone says, oh yeah, you can do that. And here's the playbook. Here's the steps you have to take. So yeah. Yep.
I think it's a great note to close on as well. I'd love to meet that 3-year-old if you can introduce me.
I just, you watch enough TikTok, you watch all kinds of stuff. They're out there. I wish I could call them all out, but yeah, not enough time.
Yeah, not enough time to call them out, right? Don't waste your time doing that. Just exactly. let them be. Yeah. But yeah, Greg, it was super awesome having you on the show today. I'm sure everybody learned a lot. from what you have to say. Just for, listeners who are wanting to reach out to you, whether they're, a younger folk looking to get into investing and house hacking, they want to learn a little bit more about it, or they're an agent, they want to learn more about learning, the investment side of things and what you're doing as well. What are some good ways that people can reach out to you? What are some platforms that you're on?
I try to be pretty active on Biggerpockets. So just Greg
Mm-hmm.
Schwartz at Biggerpockets.
Yep.
I post pretty regularly on Instagram, and I check that inbox regularly. So that's gonna be Greg _flies. And then otherwise, you can email me, Greg Schwartz at kw.com. And I love taking up my day job by talking to investors about property. So shoot me an email. We'll line up an hour. It'll make my day go by faster, and I'll get you something I love, and that keeps me off the phones with angry tenants. So it's always good.
Yeah, it's a win-win situation,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. Well, awesome, guys. You heard Greg. Make sure that you have questions, for him, or you want to reach out, send them a message, set up a call. It'll help you out, and it'll help him out too as well. So you're doing both of you guys a favor. Greg, thanks again for being on the show. This was awesome. And for the listeners out there, if you got some value out of this, if you know somebody that can get some value out of this, make sure that you are sharing this, following, subscribing, leaving a comment if you can as well, and leave some reviews for me and some feedback as well. I love to, got some episodes now. Love to hear some feedback from some of you regular listeners. So yeah, thanks again, Greg, for being on the show, and thank you guys for tuning in. And I will see you guys on the next show. Thanks, guys.